Want to expand the reach of your content? Start a podcast. Feature industry experts on your show and leverage the influence and reach of your guests to grow your brand. Learn more at sweetfishmedia.com.
You're listening to B2B Growth, a daily podcast for B2B leaders. We've interviewed names you've probably heard before, like Gary Vaynerchuk and Simon Sinek, but you've probably never heard from the majority of our guests. That's because the bulk of our interviews aren't with professional speakers and authors. Most of our guests are in the trenches leading sales and marketing teams. They're implementing strategy. They're experimenting with tactics. They're building the fastest growing B2B companies in the world. My name is James Carberry. I'm the founder of Sweetfish Media, a podcast agency for B2B brands, and I'm also one of the co-hosts of this show. When we're not interviewing sales and marketing leaders, you'll hear stories from behind the scenes of our own business. We'll share the ups and downs of our journey as we attempt to take over the world. Just kidding. Well, maybe. Let's get into the show.
Welcome back to the B2B Growth Show. I'm your host for today's episode, Sean Blackburn with Sweetfish Media. I'm joined today by Alex Rosemblat. He is the VP of Marketing over at Datadog. Alex, how are you doing today?
Doing well, thanks.
Fantastic. Glad that you're going to be on the show today. Today, we're going to be talking about how a marketing leader's role evolves as a company scales, something that we all, I think, can get a lot from. But before we jump into that, if you could just tell our listeners a little bit about you, your background, and what it is that you guys do over at Datadog.
Sure. I run marketing now at Datadog. This is, I guess, my fourth company in the B2B tech space that I'm focusing on marketing on. Previously, I was more technical and more involved in implementation and also product management and basically making sure that the product that I was working on was working for the customer. So I come from more of a product, I guess, an implementation angle. And for Datadog specifically, Datadog is a monitoring product for modern web applications. Basically, what we're trying to do is that every web application, whether it's something like Airbnb or an e-commerce shop, needs to have amazing customer experience, because if anything happens while someone's on the website, you're going to probably lose business. So we do a really robust job of seeing everything that's going on that website underneath the covers. And if there's anything that might be an issue or that's problematic, we immediately find it and raise it up to the engineering team to be able to fix.
I love that. So, and you guys are definitely thought leaders in the space as well. I see that you've got the Dash conference.
Yeah, that's a good point. There's a lot of information inside of people's heads here, both the people that work on the product and the people that work with customers, because we do work with a lot of cutting edge customers or customers that are trying to do things in new ways.
Cool.
So last year we did our inaugural conference. It's called Dash. It was in New York in July, and we've already got Dash 2019 set up. It will also be in New York in July. If you know, in New York, we're actually going to take over all of Chelsea Piers, which is kind of like a sports complex that has like a driving range and a bowling alley and things like that. And it's a lot about having people basically show what they're doing in terms of scalability, how they're running bigger, faster, more complicated web applications, and how they're making sure that everything runs really well.
Love that. So as a capability overall, you guys are helping people scale. And, we're talking about scaling the marketing team and the marketing leader's role today. Whenever someone's starting off in a marketing role and they're maybe working at a small startup, how is it that you envision that role?
Yeah. For me in particular, I was the first go-to-market person at Datadog, and I was a marketing team of one, and you will do everything.
Yeah.
There was a lot of things that I knew how they worked, but I hadn't actually gotten my hands dirty doing them. Things like marketing operations that, I had to learn from scratch. And again, like I said, I knew how it had to work, but I didn't know how to actually set this thing up really well. I'd always, of course, respected my colleagues at some of the other marketing operations that I worked in. But like when you actually have to do the job, it really makes you appreciative of what they do, and you start to understand a lot of the complexity behind it. But there was a lot of learning, a lot of podcasts, a lot of blogs, a lot of calls to people and functions that I hadn't actually done before. But, again, I think at the end of the day, you will probably do almost everything. Even if you get some contractors to beef up skills, like, I don't really have strong design chops. So we were getting some outsourced help for that. You still have to call the shots, and you have to have a really good idea of how everything fits in. I think that the way to drive success, because you are doing so much, and the only time that can be spent on marketing is basically your time. The big thing I think is I like to call it the rule of one. There's so many things that you can do for marketing, but the thing is, if you pick a lot of things, you're going to be able to spend very little time, and you're probably not going to get too far in any of them. So what I did when it was just me is I picked a thing that I was going to do as my big main project, and that's the only thing I focused on. Everything else, if people wanted it, I would just politely say like maybe later, but not now. And I also made sure that the thing that I spec'd out was scoped out for manageability because it was just me. And another kind of rule of thumb, I was assuming kind of the amount of time I spec'd out was to kind of get to 80% of that thing, or maybe flipped another way. I planned 80% of the time out, but still reserved some time because I had a feeling that anything that I was going to tackle was going to run into some issues, and I was going to have to spend more hours than I had scoped for it to get to that 100%. So I didn't like book up my calendar with every single thing I needed to do for it. I tried to keep a little bit of slack so that I would have flexibility to jump in and troubleshoot.
That's a good one. Yeah, I think that's great.
I think kind of hand in hand, another piece with that also is to be sure to set up instrumentation, noting down metrics, looking at your results on a daily, weekly, monthly, and quarterly basis. In those early days, my wife can tell you, I'd get up and over coffee, I'd be there looking at every single sign up that came in, noting down who it was, where they came from, any other information. And if I go back in time to those early days, I've got spreadsheets and spreadsheets and spreadsheets, just logging everything down, and then everything would get tallied up for a weekly, and then the weeklies would get tallied up for a monthly, and the monthlies would get tallied up for a quarterly. And, that gave me a very strong ability to prove that something was working. And very early on, when we did spec out hiring plans in those early years, I'd be able to very definitively say, I need X number of people to do this thing. And here's why. We're doing, at the current level that we're doing, we're getting this much return. If we were to double, triple, quadruple, however many people we want to hire into this function, that's how much more we'd be able to get out of it. Once you have a really strong, plan like that, all of a sudden you're working in concrete terms when you're trying to spread around what in the early days for a company is probably a very limited budget.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. I've been in a role similar to what you're describing where you're wearing all the hats. And I think that that's definitely something that if someone in our audience is in that role, to really help themselves is to do that tracking and use that data to tell the story. Like you said, as someone is starting to scale up from just being a one-person team, what's kind of the next step that you would say for someone as things begin to grow and they just begin to get overloaded?
Yeah, I think that the big thing, if you have followed the rule of one, so you've worked on a thing or two that are really successful and you can kind of do them in your sleep, they're probably still going to take up a lot of time.
Right.
But you're at a point where you've basically written out an entire playbook. And I think that the next step, there's only so many hours in the day and there's only so many hours that can be spent towards marketing efforts in a company. So the next obvious step is to try to hire in some help. I think that the best way to go is to have a very scoped out role for someone that you're going to bring in, and that they shouldn't have to invent or come up with what they're going to do. They should basically get handed a playbook and say, you hopefully are hiring them in for some previous experience with that role that you have spec'd out for them, and you hand them the playbook. And the first thing that they have to be able to do is to be able to get to the point where they can replicate the same procedures and also have the same results that you were able to get when you were in that role. I think that that's easier said than done. For anyone that has been in that kind of small marketing team, maybe it's 4 or 5 people, each one's doing a different thing. The amount of time you hand them the playbook and then you're like, okay, go. It doesn't work. It doesn't work like that. Like there's a lot of assumptions in your head, a lot of connective tissues, a lot of, who does this thing that I need, which is part of the step. No matter how thorough you try to be, however much time you think you're going to spend on onboarding that manager, that new employee, you're going to probably have to end up spending about 10 times that at a minimum to actually have them fully understand what they need to do, what the results are going to be, and then actually have them get to a point where they're doing things exactly the way that you would have done them if you were still in that role. I think another thing also with that is to try to basically, within the first couple of days or the first couple of weeks, be very thorough and very almost nitpicky. I think that when you start to bring on more people and you get into that small marketing team that's like a handful of people, all of a sudden, there's so many more hands on deck. There's so much more going on. It's really easy for things to get lost in the shuffle, but especially if you prove out, I'm taking a look at this and I'm making sure that you're going to do these things that I used to do exactly as I see them, needing to be done. And you start pointing them out. Usually that sets the precedent for that person forever on, knowing well, my boss might circle around and take a really deep look at what I'm doing at any time. I think that that's the other part. And that once you prove that out up front, that gives you, I think, a little bit more leeway to probably rotate over from person to person to person that's on your team, spending a really deep downtime from you, because all the other people know that you might at any time jump in and see how, what exactly they're up to.
I think that's really powerful too. It is annoying to take that extra amount of time. Like you said, you think all the connective tissue is there, and then you're jumping into the minutia of really, okay, here's how I connect these two things together. But it really gives you a lot of leeway and a lot more scalability down the road, doesn't it? Beyond that one person you bring on the team.
Absolutely. And, I think that the other thing is that sometimes you get people that you bring on wanting to change things up and do things differently from how you spec'd it out. My take on that, you set things up a certain way usually because you had some experiences or you ran up against some problems that forced you to do things a certain way. My take on that, you don't want to also at the same time kind of stop someone's creativity, or maybe they have an idea to expand things in a way that's really good and really productive. But I always made the analogy with Picasso. Picasso was a classically trained painter who could probably recreate any of the old masters' paintings without any trouble before he started to develop his own style. So I usually would use that analogy and say, once you're at a point where you can do it exactly as it is in the book, which is the equivalent of basically recreating one of the old master's paintings, once you can do that, then after that, definitely start to experiment around, start to do things differently and see if it works out. But you need to be able to do it the way that it definitely worked first before you're able to expand out and start to improvise.
Hey guys. Chances are you're running SEO, PPC, social, email, and other digital channels. So why aren't we spending the same time and attention on our highest converting channel, referrals? We all say we value word of mouth because we know it brings our best leads that end up being our best customers. But most of us aren't using referrals as an active marketing channel. Enter the definitive guide to referral marketing from our friends over at Ambassador. To get your free copy, head over to getambassador.com/growth. You'll learn best practices, tips, and strategies to generate positive and organic word of mouth by building your own scalable referral program. Learn from the world's leading referral company, Ambassador, trusted by leading marketers at HubSpot, Zillow, and Gong.io to build and scale their word of mouth programs. Again, go get your free copy of the definitive guide to referral marketing at getambassador.com/growth. And if you want to talk to their experts there, just drop them a note. All right, let's get back into the show.
The next kind of idea that you have, and I hadn't heard this rule before, but I love pizza, and so I definitely enjoyed looking it up. But explain the pizza roll to me. Where does that come from?
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know where it came from, but I think that anybody that listens to this, once you hear it, you can't unhear it.
Yeah.
So the pizza rule is basically like a rule of thumb about team size. And it goes that if you have a team that is larger than can be fed by a single large pizza, your team is too big. As a first line manager, I broke the pizza rule. And, I heard about it before. And then when it actually broke, it got to a point, I must have had 9 or 10 reports. It was a lot of people. And just having one-on-ones would usually take up 2 days.
Right.
So just doing a regular checkup takes up almost half your week. And then if any individual person has a problem or has a lot of questions, or you need to help them troubleshoot, that's going to take up a lot more time. If 2 people have issues that you need help out with, that's going to probably take up the whole week. And then by the time the third person starts asking for help, you don't have any time for them.
Right.
And things start to feel like they're kind of careening out of control because you literally just don't have the hours in the day. I would have meetings with people at 9, 10, 11 p.m. that were just routine meetings because things had piled up so much. And, you can get away with that for a little bit, but when it becomes a routine thing that the only time I can get help from my manager is 10 or 11 p.m. at night, that gets really old really fast.
Starts to grind, right? Yeah.
Yeah. It's not a way that you can expect to run a recurring marketing motion. So I think this is a tough one. And I have actually talked to people that are starting to break the pizza rule and are starting to feel kind of this almost out of control feeling that they just cannot take care of all of their reports and make them successful because there just aren't enough hours literally in the day. And by the time that this came up, I put my foot down. We had a hiring plan. We had just gotten a big round of funding. We had a really big org structure that we wanted to build out for the operations that we wanted to finish up the year running. And I basically said, I'm not hiring any more individual contributors until I get some managers underneath me.
Yeah.
I cannot take care of all the people that are underneath me at the level that I want to do it. So we stopped, we paused efforts. I think it's a lot easier to recruit individual contributors than it is to recruit for managers. But until we got those managers in place and that they were very strong in the functional areas that we were looking for, we did not take on any individual contributors. And that meant that, certain projects that we wanted to do weren't going to get done. And we had to say no a lot because there was not enough bandwidth. But, it was a short-term pain for a long-term gain. And then as soon as those managers started to get hired, come in and be more fully dedicated to the team members, I mean, everything just stopping a crisis all the time. And we got into a smooth, recurring marketing function.
And so, you're a leader, you start off with just yourself, you get up to a team of about 10. You have this, sort of breaking point where you need to get those managers underneath you. What did you do once you got those managers underneath you? How did you transition from one role of managing everyone on the team to managing a few people who are then managing the rest of the team? What was that like for you?
Yeah, I think that once you have kind of handed off a lot of the day-to-day to the managers underneath you that are much more focused on those areas, you all of a sudden have this like really weird feeling where you're like, wait a minute, I used to be the person that did everything. It was me in the AdWords account. It was me, in the marketing operations system. It was me running the event, where you're not doing that anymore.
Right.
But you can't sit back, because then all of a sudden you start to realize, similar to when you had a small team of individual contributors, the amount of time that it takes for them to understand how to do a process, you have to focus on that even more, because in addition to this person having to understand how your process works and then teaching people this process that maybe they weren't familiar with or is different from what they've seen before, you want them to also probably manage people or have the same kinds of rules of thumb, or one-on-one schedule, all the ways that you had seen yourself making sure that your team was happy and productive. You want them to do the same thing. So all of a sudden, a lot of your time gets focused on coaching your managers to assess situations and to react whenever they see something come up the same way that you would. It's like it's even more than what you have to do with an individual contributor. You almost have to like program their behavior or their managerial, kind of way of doing things.
Their processing system. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's even more time. I'd say that probably a huge amount of time gets put on coaching with managers, and a lot of it is like kind of a scenario breakdown. Like they'll say, this thing happened. Okay, let's take a step back. Like, let's get it on paper, or maybe not get it on paper, but let's say what led up to it. Then what happened? Then how did you react? All right, so that already started you going down this other path that led to the end result that wasn't exactly what we wanted. What have you done this? Right? And you keep on doing these hypotheticals. And then that you've actually accomplished things, right? When, everything starts getting done the way that you would have done it, or people start responding back with things like it's in your head, and then they say exactly what's in your head, and you're like, wait a minute, this is weird. Like, I didn't know you were going to say that. That was about what was kind of about to come out of my mouth, but clearly you've gotten the methodology down. I think that's one thing. I think Absolutely. Another thing that I discovered early on when you do get more managers is that no matter what you do, I think it's just a human thing. You start to get some tribalism that comes in. And, especially marketing, I think, is different from a lot of other functions, because it is really an assemblage of a lot of different skill sets that are all working together to get like a single thing out the door. So, you start seeing, for instance, that the graphic design team, they're going really deep into making things look really pretty and artistic. Or, the events team is really focusing on having like this amazing customer experience, which of course you should have. But like everyone kind of starts going into their going deeper and deeper and deeper into their specific disciplines.
Right.
The thing is, everyone's got to do their piece, and like maybe the graphic design team shouldn't be super artistic. They have to scale it back a little bit to still make it functional for whatever they're working for. Or the events team, of course they should focus on a super high-end experience, but they also do have to provide, an ROI and certain, yields at the end of the day of how many people got spoken to at a trade show, or how many people you met with. So you have to scale that back and focus more on the internal processes. So, I think that you find yourself kind of having to be referee. And I think a big way to fix this is to set up recurring manager meetings. So, every week, all the marketing managers get together, go around the room, people can focus on problems. I do it right before lunch, so we can even go long if we have to, if something comes up that needs to be discussed. But you also find yourself being the one to set up processes between teams, and, you kind of become the referee, because you know what the end result has to be. And if people are really passionate about their specific area, you're the one that's able to really portion it out a lot.
That makes sense.
One other thing that I think is also important, if you do find yourself being a second line manager, is that, I feel like things get broken up into two different areas. One is doing recurring things that are already, completely proofed and I like to call them, they're prod ready, the prod level, which is a technical term. Like, this thing works, it's been completely vetted, and, just keep on doing it forever. And then the other thing is brand new initiatives. A lot of times they're experiments. Something that I make sure to do is that no new initiative, no new experiment goes public without having had, being proved. And usually when you come in, with more experience or having done something similar before, or just a fresh set of eyes, you find a lot of little things that need to be touched up.
Right.
I think that you also find out that any hot spots will bubble up to you for troubleshooting. And you already have things that you need to do, like reporting up or leading a departmental meeting in all hands for, the marketing team that's taking up a lot of time. I think that at the end of the day, you find out that you don't have the time to do much, if any, actual marketing work, because you're there basically helping and facilitating everyone else that is actually doing that work.
I love that. Yeah. So you're really transitioning from being honestly a practitioner or someone who's doing something technical, like you said, whether that was graphic design or managing Google AdWords or, manning the booth at the trade show. You're doing less of that and you're doing a lot more talent management. That's a different role.
Yes, it definitely is. And I don't know that people are necessarily born with that skill set. Maybe some people are. Maybe they just kind of pick it up from sports or other kinds of things that they do, where they're in a similar role at another point in their life or in their career. But I definitely think that it's something, to get mentorship from someone that's done a lot of it before, read some books on the topic of how to coach well. So, yeah, I think that for anyone that's new to a second line managerial position, do not think you're just going to pick it up. Mentorship, I think, is probably the best way to do it. In fact, I can even give a recommendation for what I think is probably the best book I've read on the topic, the book Team of Teams by General Stanley McChrystal. It is an amazing book. So General McChrystal was the person that got put into Iraq in the mid-2000s when things were kind of getting out of control over there. His insight was that the main root of the problem is an organizational structure and process issue, that different groups like the Navy SEALs and the CIA and the Department of State were not coordinating things together. And his challenge was that this amounted to several thousand people split across 20 different organizations. He basically gives the blueprint of how he brought everyone together to focus on one single goal, with everyone understanding what the role was in a way that it didn't have to be directed. Everyone just kind of figured it out. I won't steal his thunder because I think the book's really good. A lot of the things from that book I definitely picked up, adjusted, and ran with. I think that the last piece that is important, if you do some actual hands-on marketing work, it should probably be because it's an absolute emergency and this thing's due the next day, or you're the only person that has the background or the skill set to be able to do it, or you are making a prototype that another group within the company or another person is going to take and kind of start doing a lot with that prototype. But I also think that it's important to always have some actual marketing thing that you're working on in the background. Spend very few hours a month on it, but just something that you're working on that's probably low priority, because you do kind of start to feel the distance from being hands-on all the time, and it does keep you sharp.
I love that. Just curious, is there anything that you would describe as that sort of background marketing activity that you're doing right now?
We're doing a fair amount of thought leadership to different groups than we have before. And, in that situation, these particular groups are people that I've met. I've gone to conferences and hung out with these specific groups. I understand how they think. They've shared with their kind of their good days, their bad days with me. I don't know that many other people have had as much exposure to those groups. So again, I take a look at something that is meant for that group, and it just doesn't feel right. So I'm taking a stab. And once we get to a format that we feel works, and of course I'm going to want to have some end user acceptance on this. Is this thing getting read? Is it getting downloaded? Once that prototype's done, we're going to probably get that prototype out for a lot of people to use as a template for that kind of thought leadership content.
I love it. Well, this is exciting stuff. And, for people who are in this sort of role, I really think that this has been some valuable content as their teams are growing and they're starting to pull their hair out. So I really appreciate it. If anybody wants to connect with you more and just reach out to you, what would be the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, my email is pretty easy. It's just alex@datadoghq.com. Nice thing about being an early employee, you usually get the first name email address. So
there you go. Yep.
Happy to chat with anyone.
Thanks, Alex. Appreciate it. And thanks for being on the show.
Likewise.
Digital marketing agencies have a tough job. You have to stay on top of the latest marketing strategies for your clients and your agency. What if there was a way you could address both at the same time? Imagine your agency putting out content with greater quality and quantity. Envision bringing your clients a turnkey solution for one of B2B marketing's fastest growing media strategies, podcasting. All those clients asking for your help with their account-based marketing efforts? Picture being the first to bring them the idea of content-based networking, showing them the proven strategy for breaking into their most coveted accounts. Here's the concept. Sweetfish Media is looking to work with a limited number of innovative agencies interested in a new partnership model. We produce a podcast for your agency. You introduce the power of podcasting and Sweetfish services to your clients. Everybody wins. Learn more at sweetfishpartners.com.